Good morning. Today we have a jump in the readings because we're celebrating two lads who knew this lake very well and who got a very special call that shook up their lives immensely. And one of them is Simon the Zealot, and the other is Judas Thaddeus. Buenos dias. They've been out here. When I went out to swim, they were already here. So imagine having a name like Judas. So there are two apostles called Judas. But in English, unlike many other languages, because of the sensitivity of the issue, he's known as Jude. And so we have Jude because he's probably partly for that reason, he is the patron of hopeless cases. And there are wonderful works carrying his name, a whole chain of things, Jude. And the name even was in a famous song, Hey Jude. And one of our companions is Father Jude. He's not too well right now, so I'll say a prayer for him. He was one of the first Irish members of our community, of the Legionaries of Christ. And he has had a couple of health setbacks. He must be about 80 years of age now. He's a great teacher, knew many, many languages, biblical scholar, archaeological scholar. So Jude and Simon, two guys who knew this lake very well, who saw so much of Jesus' life here. And they knew the environment here, Mount Arbel. Maybe they were in those caves one day hiking with Jesus. Imagine that experience, to have spent all that time with them. And the challenges of living together. Just imagine Simon the Zealot, Simon was also a very common name. We have the two Judes, the tribe of Judah. Obviously a very common name. And Simon is also a tribe name. But Simon also has another aspect in that time, because apparently the two most common names, or among the most common names in the first century Jewish names, were precisely Simon and what was the other one? I learned that the other day. And 2 of every 6 of every 12 or 2 of every 6 boys were called either Simon or, oh come on, my brain. And it was because of the Maccabees. Since the Maccabees were they were the great heroes who shook off the Greeks. They were the recent political heroes of a few generations back, you know. And the name was very popular. Like sometimes kids are named after a famous football star or a pop star. There are a lot of Brittany's around, you know. So the name became very popular because of an artist. So the same way, Simon was a very common name. And if that was the case, then it was also a rather patriotic family, very strong nationalistic family, anti-foreign influence family. And Jesus calls him to be part of the 12 apostles, but also Jesus called Matthew over here in Capernaum, right across the lake. If we just follow a straight line now from here and you go to the edge of that little set of floats, and right across on the right side of that float, you can keep going across where the birds are flying right through there. You have the white spot at the edge of the water, and that's Capernaum, the Orthodox Church in Capernaum. So that's where Jesus called Matthew. So can you imagine Matthew looking at Jesus when he called Simon, or Simon looking at Matthew if he was first when Jesus called Matthew? Imagine the mutual hostility. Total opposite ends of the spectrum. And they had to learn to walk together, to support each other, to grow together, to learn about a different kingdom, not an earthly kingdom, serving a foreign political power, dominating or proposing one's own nationalistic, militant power. My kingdom is not of this world. And the molding of their persons through that experience, they all had to go through molding. James and John in Samaria wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy a village because they didn't receive Jesus. They probably didn't receive them because they were Jewish. The Samaritans didn't get on well with the Jewish people. And so James and John want to react that way. And all of them have a hard time learning this new way of Jesus, meek and humble of heart. I think that's difficult for all of us. When we're wronged, when some people cross us, it's not easy. And when Jesus is calling these to be the apostles, to a very special group, the 12, I have a big suggestion that we don't interpret this feministically in the feminist ideology of our times, because that wasn't an issue at that time. And it wasn't the lens through which to see that choice. That choice is based on the 12 tribes. And the scattered tribes had to be reunited. That was part of the Messianic times. And the establishing of the 12 was precisely symbolizing that. And one of the lines of the text is that they will judge the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 apostles. Can you imagine? That's what Jesus said. So their call is very special. So when Jesus wants to do this, he goes up the mountain to pray and spend the night in prayer to God. When we have big decisions to make, do we really take time to pray? He spent the whole night in prayer. It was a very big decision. It was a key messianic action, a dramatic action. You know, when I remember as a child, we had celebrated the 50th anniversary of the uprising in Dublin, the Easter uprising of the rebellion against the English lordship in Ireland. So then you have more nationalism there, obviously. At that time, I didn't have such a critical view of this kind of action. But in fact, the whole Irish people were not very enthusiastic about it. Afterwards, when the results worked out, obviously we all embraced and loved our Irish independence and freedom from England. But in the celebration, then the 50th anniversary of the celebration, that was taken very much to heart. And I forgot the idea I was going to say about it. So forgive me for that. We were talking about decisions and taking time to pray about great decisions. The proclamation part. So we studied that proclamation that was signed by the signatories of the Irish uprising in 1916. That was a very dramatic moment when the signatories signed that and they proclaimed it in front of the GPO, I think the General Post Office in Dublin, or a major public building in Dublin as they took it. So they declared the Irish Republic as founded. And they were the signatories of that declaration. And that was understood to be a very dramatic moment. At that moment, it didn't have any impact immediately because it was just a group of people together on the steps of a public building declaring that. But then they took over the building, and then obviously it was during Easter. It was called the Easter Uprising. And a lot of the English officials had gone back to England. It was during the First World War, 1916. And a lot of Irish people had signed up with the British Army in the First World War, supporting the British Army's efforts, because Ireland was part of the British Empire at that time, unwillingly, but there. And then you had this group of Irish people rebelling, and then the English came back with a vengeance and destroyed the uprising. But the spirit of the uprising lasted and led to the freedom in Ireland. But you had that dramatic moment. It was a drama as a symbol. And the same way the 12 apostles, the founding of the 12 apostles is a very strong symbolic language. And Jesus goes to pray all night before choosing them. And they know that afterwards, maybe. Or maybe some of them were close by when he went off to pray, and they knew he had gone off to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer. Maybe it was one of the first times they saw him doing it that way, and they were amazed. And they make note of it. Jesus went up the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God. When day came, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles, sent out. That's a word that's very dear to our heart here in Magdala, because in Magdala we remember Mary Magdalene, who then became recognized as the first apostle because she went with the good news of the resurrection. But then going back to our theme, they're all named, the 12 apostles. And in further texts, then we realize that this has extraordinary significance for the mindset, the messianic expectation for the Jewish mindset of the time, the understanding that the Messiah would reconstitute the 12 tribes of Israel. And now listen to this text then in St. Paul, because this is continuing this whole idea in Ephesians. Brothers and sisters, you are no longer strangers and sojourners, but you are fellow citizens with the holy ones and members of the household of God. The household of God. The house of Jacob. Members of the house of Jacob were the 12 tribes. Members of the household of God. And listen to how it works out. With Christ Jesus himself as the capstone, you are built upon the foundation of the apostles. The foundation of the apostles. And we find that line later on in the book of Revelation, where the heavenly Jerusalem coming down is built on the 12 courses of foundation, or the 12, there's another way, there are a couple of ways of that, how that's translated. But basically the heavenly Jerusalem, which is really the redeemed, ultimate chosen people of God, is built on the 12 apostles. And then it adds, and the prophets, built upon the foundations of the apostles and the prophets. And the apostles are named first before the prophets. So this reveals a very interesting order of reality in the new messianic kingdom. And there you see the significance of it, because they're representing the 12 tribes, and the 12 tribes precede the apostles. Precede the prophets. The prophets come much later. The 12 tribes, their story is in the book of Genesis. Their very checkered and colored story is in the book of Genesis. And we don't have the prophets until the time of the exile, basically. Although sometimes David is called a prophet, and others. When we're talking about the prophets in general, we're talking about Elijah, who comes way after David, and Elisha, or we had Nathan the prophet at the time of David. And then we have all the major prophets of the exile: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, all the books of the prophets, the major prophets and the minor prophets. So reading that text again, you are fellow citizens with the holy ones and members of God's household. And these are normal guys with all their ups and downs, their political allegiances that have to be shaped and transformed. What's your political allegiance? Does it need shaping and transforming with the light of the gospel, with Jesus meek and humble of heart? And just so Judas, son of Jacob, of James, doesn't feel left out here, maybe somebody is worried about association they have through their name with somebody that's in disgrace. But it doesn't matter, because disgrace isn't what we're about. We're about grace in Christ. And each one has their own situation to answer for. So we leave it like that for today, people, with a very great joyous psalm. Their message goes out through all the earth. These very normal human beings called by Jesus here at the Sea of Galilee, and their message goes out through all the earth. What a beautiful morning. See you later, alligators. God bless you.